Welcome to 2819. I'm Sandra Diemez.
And I'm Brian Rohenbacher.
And we have a great show for you today, filled with tons of topics to get you thinking deeply.
That's right. In Culture Talk, Sandra will be speaking with philosopher George Haraksin on the issue of why Christians don't share their faith.
And in Give and Take, Jeff Zweerink will be talking with philosopher and theologian Ken Samples about assessing the intellectual climate.
It's going to be a good one.
Yeah.
First up is RTB 101. Krista will be speaking with astrophysicist Jeff Zweerink on whether artificial intelligence can think like a human.
Let's check it out.
And joining me today to talk about a very interesting question is my colleague, physicist, Dr. Jeff Zweerink. Welcome, Jeff.
Hi, Krista. Good to be on the show today.
So I know that you're working on a book on artificial intelligence, and it's a subject I don't know too much about. So maybe you can start us off by talking about what is the big deal with artificial intelligence? What are they trying to do with that research?
Well, the answer to that kind of depends on who you talk to. There are some who are just saying, you know what, the more we can use computers to understand or at least analyze data well, the more data we can feed to them, the better they can do things that are useful to us, like analyze X-ray images to find tumors or breaks or things wrong in lungs, or help to navigate or just do things that are beneficial for humanity. There's some that's really the end goal. But when I think about artificial intelligence, I think most people are thinking of the R2-D2s, the C-3POs, the HALs, or you kind of come earlier, maybe the Vision from the Marvel universe, things where you've built a computer that now has an artificial intelligence, something that can think and act like a human, or at least the way a human does. And then there are some who even envision that once we do that, this artificial intelligence will kind of become a superpower and almost take over the world, either save or destroy humanity. So it kind of depends on who you're talking to. There's kind of a really broad range of what the goal is with artificial intelligence research.
I'm a very simple person. I don't know much about this. And when I think of artificial intelligence, I'm wondering if we're talking about something like Siri, which I find horribly annoying because I'm always wondering if she's listening to my conversations. But is that kind of a type of artificial intelligence?
Yeah, that's kind of a very low-level artificial intelligence. It's a very narrow intelligence, one that is listening to voice commands, interpreting those commands, figuring out what they need, and generating an output on the other end. I would put it it's a rather complicated task, but for an artificial intelligence, it's a rather simple task because really all it's doing is taking a bunch of input, mapping it through some very complex network of nodes and producing an output on the other side. So it hears certain words and it says, okay, that means I do this. Or if it hears a different set of words, that means something else. But it's really just correlating the input with the output. There's not a lot of thought going on, but it does a very good job of analyzing very complex relationships to find the correlations.
What would be the next step after that?
Well, kind of the next step. So again, recognizing that basically all of the artificial intelligences we have are in that kind of very correlation, low level. Basically, they see something and then they do something. It's a very straightforward, if convoluted through a network, it's a straightforward principle through the network. The next step in that would be saying, you know what, rather than just mapping the inputs to the outputs, asking the question, what happens if I intervene in the system? And so, there's a fellow who wrote a book called the Book of Why, where he talks about this kind of ladder of causation, where you get beyond that seeing to where you're actually intervening. And so the seeing would be, if people buy toothpaste, do they also buy dental floss? Now, the next level of that would saying, okay, if people actually bought toothpaste, might they also buy something else? So the data may not be there, but then the system could intervene and figure out, take some new data, basically experiment, do some scientific experiments, if you will, and see, is this other outcome? So it's intervening in what's going on rather than just mapping out this very static or complex sets of inputs and outputs. It's intervening to see what else might be going on.
So in my case, since I'm looking for a mattress, it might try to intervene and see if I would also like to buy something else unrelated to mattresses, but that would require an intervention. Is that kind of what you're saying?
Yeah, like that. So you're looking for mattresses. Obviously, that means, okay, you want to sleep better, but it might go in and say, you know what? Getting a new mattress might mean that you have back problems. Are you having back problems as well? And going and exploring that. Right now, that's a kind of an intervention. It's not just mapping the correlations, if you will. So that's kind of that next level of intelligence.
Okay. Now, as we're kind of working our way up this ladder, as you called it a minute ago, I'm wondering what that next rung is in the artificial intelligence development.
So the next ladder, or the next rung of that ladder, is where you're actually imagining things that there are no data for. And what's interesting is that humans do this seamlessly. So you're talking about buying a mattress. So, do you want a soft one or a firm one? There's these very low level correlations that seeing what's there. There's the intervening of, might you have a back problem going on there? And then the next level would be imagining things that there can't be any data for. So, we might think, man, what would happen if I hadn't done that stupid bike trick 10 years ago that's causing me back problems? It's a world that doesn't exist, and there's no data on that world. But yet, as humans, we kind of think pretty seamlessly about that. We can think about those worlds that don't exist and wonder and actually get a pretty good picture. That would be that next level of causation, that next level of intelligence, if you will.
So then we're really starting to try to approach kind of human intelligence, where we're drawing connections between unrelated ideas. Is that kind of what you're talking about?
It's unrelated ideas, and there's you're kind of now getting at the boundary between intelligence and conscious, because to do that latter, where you're thinking about things that don't exist, at least with humans, one of the things we do is we're kind of asking, what's our place in all of this? And so we could imagine, what happens if I didn't do this? What happens if I weren't here? Why am I here? Do I have a purpose? And so it's kind of getting a bigger picture where you're understanding not just the correlations you can see, not even how things might be a little different or how I could get some information on things a little different, but what if the world were a whole different? What's my place in it? And that's a place where computers are very far from that. And I wonder if we're ever even going to be able to do that.
Kind of tell me what you see on the horizon as the gospel challenges with AI.
Well, I think one of the things I think this research into AI does is that it really kind of forces Christians to sit down and think, okay, what does it mean to be made in the image of God? What is it, and what are our capacities in that? Obviously, God has given us the abilities to create and make things and to invent ideas and think about our place. So there's some of that just the very nature that we're even asking these questions points towards there being something beyond the universe that we're trying to relate to, if you will. But I also think there's a strong argument you can make that in order to make consciousness, that requires something higher. I mean, basically, to do that, we are replicating ourselves. And I don't know that God has given us that facility. But even let's just say, even if he has, at the end of the day, the gospel message is that there's a creator who fashioned the universe, who put humanity in there to relate to him, and we rebelled. That necessitated, or that put in play the trajectory where God was going to come in human form as the second person of the Godhead would become incarnate, die for our sins, pay for our bridge the gap between us and God so that we can relate to him. Even if we create other beings that can do very powerful things, that doesn't really impinge on the gospel message. And I really think this is a key part of that as well, is that I think we can create intelligences will continually mimic human behavior more and more. But at the end of the day, the computer is not going to think about it like we do. So say you're buying a mattress, you finally found out one, you lay down on the mattress, you think, this is wonderful. Life is good because of this. This is going to make my life so much better. A computer just isn't going to do that. It's going to say, I chose a mattress. What's the next thing to do? There's not that joy of engaging with the world that comes with that consciousness, your place in the world. And I don't think that's ever going to change, or I don't think we're ever going to be able to do that. And so in that sense, the gospel is really never going to be impinged by artificial intelligence research, although we might create a tool that creates some big problems for us.
Well, very good. Well, this has been a kind of a fun little jaunt into something new for me. So I want to encourage all our viewers, if you haven't yet, go check out Jeff's blog, Impact Events. You can find it at reasons.org.
I'm joined today with philosopher and former pastor George Haraksin. Thank you, George, for joining us.
Great to be here, Sandra.
We're going to be talking about kind of a tricky topic. So we've noticed that sometimes when people consume apologetics material, that they aren't necessarily consuming for the purpose of sharing their faith. And we've even seen that a recent Barna study shows that more and more people now feel like sharing their faith is optional, and it's not something that, we really ought to be doing necessarily. So we want to dive into this topic. But first, let's talk about what apologetics is.
Doing apologetics at Reasons, we emphasize using apologetics in the service of evangelism. But what is using apologetics? And for me, doing apologetics is really helping people search for the truth, but doing it in kindness, not in conflict. And if I'm going to engage with someone in an apologetic conversation, I want to put my arm around them and I want to say, hey, we're seeking the truth out there. Let's both discover it together. If you show me the truth and I'm mistaken, I'm open to adjusting my view, but we're on a search for truth together. There may be times where I feel like I know the truth, but I humbly offer that as an item of knowledge, and I'm open to discussing it, to defending it, to challenging it with another person. So it's something that I'm doing together with another person, even if they don't agree, and we're on that journey together rather than being adversaries.
Right. So, if we think about apologetics, oftentimes as a means to defend our faith, we want to be careful, like you're saying, to do so with gentleness. And that's a big mission that we have here at Reasons to Believe, is to share our faith, but to do so with kindness and gentleness and respect. So as you are engaging in apologetics and you are sharing your faith, why do you feel like maybe others are having a hard time with that and having a hard time with sharing their faith, perhaps in this kind of cultural climate that we're in?
Yeah, there's probably multifaceted reasons why. There may be some philosophical reasons why people aren't. I read a study that sort of broke down why, it gave 5 reasons why people don't choose to share their faith. And I thought they were very, very interesting. And I was wondering if I could share those with you, and then maybe you could talk about them with me, because when I look at the breakdown of people who aren't intentionally sharing their faith, 33% are afraid of being rejected or embarrassed. So we might call that a moral or a character problem there. They're afraid of getting hurt in some way or being embarrassed, and that's a part of the human condition, but that's something that we overcome with courage, which is the appropriate response to being fearful. 21.7% said they were afraid of not having answers. And here's where reasons come in. We could call this a knowledge problem, not a character problem. And so getting the knowledge that you need is important to help you feel confident. Interestingly, 19% rarely even think about the need. So there we could say it's a focus problem. If nearly 20%, it's just not coming within their consciousness, whether throughout the day or throughout the week. And then about 8.3% haven't found a way to share their faith that just fits who they are. They have images, pictures of people sharing their faith in their mind, but it doesn't really work for them. So we might call this a methodological problem. They don't really have the right tools, or it's not fitting who they are.
Yeah, I love how you've broken that down. So we have methodological, character, focus, and then what was the fourth one?
It would be either a knowledge problem or a
Knowledge.
content problem.
Right.
You don't know what to say. You get stumped.
And you know what? I think that it's great to kind of identify those different reasons why, because then people can say, for me, hey, maybe it is a character issue and I'm known as this character and that doesn't fit with what one would expect to be Christian values. Or maybe there's a knowledge thing where I'm living the life, but I have no idea how to defend my faith. with compassion. So here's where then people can kind of get a pathway and say, if it's this issue, I go this way to help kind of address that issue and learn how to have those conversations. So what practical tips would you offer, let's say for each one of those things, for a character, knowledge, methodological, and focus? What tips would you offer to those who feel like they're struggling in any one of those areas?
Yeah, I'll start with two. If it's a moral problem, feelings of being rejected or embarrassed, there we need to develop courage. And I think one of the best ways to develop courage is taking small or little risks and building up confidence over time. Yeah, we may have an image of someone going door to door or, in some big venue sharing their faith, but trying it in much smaller increments you might be able to build moral courage. And that's an important thing today, especially with various kinds of pressures. I think we're going to have to build the virtue of courage much better and to not do it alone. Hugh has talked about this many times, about us partnering with one another and not doing it on our own. And that can build moral courage too, partnering up with people. Also, on the methodological side, I think it's good to identify your personality type, if you will. I actually think that when you identify your personality type, just kind of more who you are and you're comfortable in your skin, then your evangelism, how you share your faith, can flow out of who you are instead of being imprinted by someone else's style. So perhaps people might think of, at least in an older time, a Billy Graham style in a stadium or going door to door. That's a very assertive style. And most of us aren't that assertive. But let's say we're very hospitable. We like to cook food and invite people into our homes. That's an easy way to just befriend persons and begin to interact with them. Hospitality could be a form. And I put it in two categories. Some people are more sayers, some people are more doers. And you should identify your personality. Are you more of a sayer or more of a doer? I tend to be more of a sayer. I'm a philosopher. I like to talk about ideas and that. But I need help from doers, people who get out there. They do things to serve people, to help them. And in the midst of that, we can naturally have conversations about reality, God, and how to discover God.
If people want to hear more from you, where do they go?
Well, one place they can go is reasons.org. And if you hit on the Get Involved button, you can see me there under the scholar community. And I was a visiting scholar back in 2016. So that's one place that you can go.
Today, I'm joined by my friend and colleague, Ken Samples, and we're going to be looking at the intellectual climate of the day. Ken, it's good to have you on the show.
Pleased to be with you, Jeff.
So, Ken, that term intellectual climate kind of is an odd term. Why don't you flesh out for us? What does that mean?
Yeah, the German, it comes from a German term meaning zeitgeist. The Germans have these kind of provocative words. Their word for worldview is Weltanschauung. And so philosophers kind of adopt some of the German thinking. But a zeitgeist means the spirit of the age or the spirit of the time. So it's essentially the idea that sometimes there are ideas that kind of deeply influence a particular climate. And so zeitgeist would ask, what kind of intellectual, moral, cultural, philosophical ideas are very popular at a given time?
There's a part of me where that seems odd because this intellectual climate kind of has this, it seems to imply a pursuit of truth. But if I understand what you're saying about the intellectual climate, that there's some subtlety or nuance to that. What are some of the ways, or what are some of those subtleties and nuance, and how do they play out?
Well, I think one way that philosophers have kind of looked at different eras, thinking of these very broad eras. So at given times and given places, a worldview would have a deep influence. we often think of Christianity in the ancient world kind of reflecting what we might call a pre-modern view, where there would be an emphasis upon truth, goodness, and beauty. So truth is objective. Human beings are able to grasp it. Then we kind of move through the Enlightenment era, which is more secular. They would say truth is discovered rather than in revelation from God. It's found in science. It's found in human reason. And then I think what we have during our particular time now, many people would call that a postmodern period, where there may be no objective truth, and therefore any kind of statements you make about truth are purely subjective and relativistic. And I think that probably does get a lot of play in our kind of world and in the media.
So this idea, yeah, it's interesting how you described the different views on truth. That in the Christian era, truth is through revelation, and the Enlightenment era, truth is through natural observation, natural theology, or studying the creation, if you will. And where now there's like this almost not even sure whether truth exists, or if it is it the same for everybody? How do you have an intellectual climate where, or what happens in an intellectual climate where truth isn't something that people can all agree on?
Well, that's part of, I think, the framework of this. I mean, typically Christians would talk about truth, goodness, and beauty. Those are objective things. Human beings are made in God's image. They can gravitate toward them. However, today, people may talk about a different. They may talk about a different framework. For example, today we talk about race, gender, and class. So the identity is different. Rather than the image of God, it's maybe your skin color, maybe your sex, or your social class. And even the ideas of truth. Some people would suggest today we live in a post-truth period, which means that we're highly relying more on our feelings, our opinions, or our personal experiences.
So how do you have education if there isn't some truth that everybody is agree on that we're pursuing?
I think that's a perfect question, Jeff, because I think we live at a time where there really is a difference between education, indoctrination, or even propaganda. Education, and I think you and I experienced that during our time of study, that's where you're taught a particular topic with the goal of you developing a critical, rational, and independent judgment of things. So my goal as a teacher of you is not to get you to think what I think or to tell you what I think. It's to give you the critical ideas so that you can develop an independent judgment. Well, that's education, but indoctrination is rather than teaching you how to think, I tell you what to think. And of course, propaganda would be the idea that I want to manipulate you. I don't care to get you to come up with your view. I want you to accept my view no matter what. And today, all you have to do is watch the news. There's lots of discussion about whether the leading universities in our country, whether they educate or indoctrinate or possibly propagandize their students.
Yeah, it does seem like that's the way education, or what is called education today, is very different than when I was in school, a number of years ago. I want to go back to your discussion, or you made a comment about objective reality versus subjective feelings. Flesh that out a little bit more. What were you talking about there?
Well, if we again think of those three eras, we might describe the very influential Christian era in the ancient and medieval world. Sometimes that's been described as the era of faith. Now it's not an irrational faith; it's kind of faith seeking understanding. But the Enlightenment, interestingly enough, was called the period of reason, the age of reason. Some people today would say that we live in the age of emotion, or the age of feelings. And again, we see a lot of this at the university campus, where people will say, I don't want you to present ideas to me that may threaten or maybe make me feel uncomfortable. Whereas I was always taught, and I think you were taught the same, that an education is supposed to make you feel uncomfortable. It's supposed to challenge you so that you can think critically and thoughtfully about the various issues. I think we probably do live in an age that's given much ideas in terms of emotion or feeling.
Yeah, I do. I find that a little bit worrisome because part of what I've been taught is, you find the truth, you find the facts, you choose to believe the facts, and the feelings, you kind of want your feelings to adjust to reality instead of having your feelings define the reality of what you accept. That seems to play into kind of the last issue I want to talk about. Talking about explaining human depravity, just all of the problems that we have out there. How does the current intellectual climate deal with that?
Yeah, well, again, the idea of what is good, how should I live my life, what's right and wrong, those issues, again, are thought of in very relativistic categories. But I would again propose the idea that it seems that human beings have a moral anchor within. I mean, the more I'm exposed to the idea that there is human trafficking in the world where, young girls, young boys are kidnapped and made to be sexual objects, I mean, I can't believe that something like that could be allowed. So even if there is a relativistic idea about good and bad, right or wrong, it seems that there are some things that hit virtually all of us as being wrong. So I think that indicates, Jeff, we live in a moral universe, and I would argue that moral universe is given to us by a moral God who expects justice.
Well, very good comments, Ken. I thank you and appreciate your involvement today. When we look out at today's society, we see that there's a very definite way that people look at things, a way that people want you to look at things. And what I love about what Ken was bringing to the table today is just realizing that we can look at the intellectual climate of today, and if we want to effectively engage our culture, we need to understand what that intellectual climate is. He's written a great article about this. Go to reasons.org and find his article. It's called Snapshot of Today's Intellectual Climate. It will give you some great tools and insight that allows you to bring the truth of the gospel into today's conversations in a way that people will want to know who God is and how they relate to him.
That does it for us this week on 2819. We hope you enjoyed this episode and that it helps equip you to share your faith with confidence and compassion.
And we hope you'll subscribe to the show on YouTube, and you'll also find us on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram. We are at 2819 Show. We'd love to hear from you. Nice comments only.
Also, if you like the podcast version, you can get it wherever you listen to your podcast. Just search Reasons to Believe Podcast.
See you next week.
Bye.